October 18th, 1940, south of Iceland. The North Atlantic has become a graveyard, and tonight it will swallow another 21 ships in a single night of fire and screaming steel. A torpedo slams into the merchant vessel SS Languedoc. The detonation rips her hull open like wet cardboard. 40,000 gallons of crude oil ignite instantly, transforming the Black Ocean into a lake of liquid flame. Men leap from burning decks into burning water. Their screams carry across 2 miles of open sea. Another torpedo strikes. Another ship explodes. Then another. Then another. Within 6 hours, 21 merchant vessels from convoy SC-7 are gone. Smoke columns rise 3,000 feet into the freezing air. The 2 Royal Navy escort ships circle helplessly through the wreckage, unable to stop what is happening, unable to even slow it down. 5 German U-boats are hunting them. 5 against 2. The mathematics of slaughter. In London, Winston Churchill receives the casualty report at 4 in the morning. His hands shake as he reads it. Britain is bleeding to death across 3,000 miles of ocean. 300,000 tons of shipping vanishing every month. At this rate, the island nation has perhaps 18 months before starvation forces surrender. But tonight, in a small drafting room in northeastern England, a civilian naval architect named William Reed is unrolling blueprints that everyone in the Admiralty will call insane. He is proposing that Britain stop building proper warships entirely. He wants to build whaling boats instead. Cheap, slow, ugly, ridiculous. They cost 1/10 the price of a destroyer. The Royal Navy's senior officers will laugh him out of the room. They will be wrong. By the end of this war, Reed's ridiculous fishing boats will help destroy 294 German U-boats and kill 15,000 of Hitler's most elite submariners. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into history's most incredible untold stories. Join us as we uncover more legendary moments from the past. This is the story of how a forgotten whaling ship designer saved the British Empire with a vessel his own navy called scarcely fit for purpose. To understand why William Reed's ridiculous idea would matter, you must understand exactly how close Britain came to total collapse in the autumn of 1940. The numbers were apocalyptic. Britain imported 55 million tons of supplies every single year. Food, fuel, ammunition, steel, rubber, everything that kept 48 million people alive, and an army fighting. Cut that lifeline, and the United Kingdom would not need to be invaded. It would simply starve. Admiral Karl Dönitz understood this perfectly. The German submarine commander had spent years developing a doctrine he called Rudeltaktik, Wolfpack tactics. Instead of sending U-boats out to hunt alone, Dönitz coordinated entire groups. A lead submarine would shadow a convoy, radioing position reports, while 6, 8, sometimes 10 sister boats raced to converge. When the trap closed, U-boats attacked simultaneously from multiple directions. The mathematics were brutal and elegant. A convoy with 2 escort ships could not be in 6 places at once. While 1 destroyer chased a torpedo wake to starboard, 3 U-boats were emptying their tubes into helpless merchantmen on the port side. The slaughter at convoy SC-7 was not an accident. It was the system working perfectly. 43 ships had departed Sydney, Nova Scotia. 21 of them were on the bottom of the Atlantic before sunrise. The Royal Navy began September 1939 with exactly 200 escort vessels. Most were obsolete. Many were 30 years old. Meanwhile, Dönitz commanded 57 U-boats with German shipyards producing 30 more every month. Churchill called it the only campaign that genuinely terrified him. He gave it a name that would echo through history, the Battle of the Atlantic. He wrote later that everything else, the bombing, the invasions, the Desert War, depended on this one fight. Lose the Atlantic, and nothing else mattered. The obvious solution gleamed in every Royal Navy shipyard. Destroyers. These 36-knot Greyhounds carried 4 4.7-inch guns, quintuple torpedo tubes, and enough firepower to engage German capital ships. They were engineering masterpieces representing 3 centuries of British naval supremacy. They were also financial suicide. Each destroyer cost £200,000 in 1940 currency, roughly £45 million today. Each one consumed 18 months of specialized labor by workers trained to thousandths of an inch tolerances. Britain possessed exactly 7 shipyards capable of building them. Maximum production: 30 destroyers per year. The math did not work. It could not work. Britain was losing ships 10 times faster than it could replace them. Something had to change. Everything had to change. And the man who would change it was not even in the Royal Navy. William Reed was not a warrior. He was an engineer from Middlesbrough who had spent his entire career designing ships for the dirtiest, most miserable industry on Earth: Antarctic whaling. Throughout the 1930s, Reed worked at Smith's Dock Company crafting vessels called the Southern Pride class. They were not glamorous. They were not fast. They were not pretty. They were built to slaughter blue whales in seas so violent they killed crews regularly. But Reed had learned something from those whaling ships that no destroyer designer understood. He had learned how to build a ship that any shipyard in Britain could construct using standard materials and ordinary workers. Reed was 48 years old in May 1940. Quiet, methodical, the kind of man who carried slide rules in his jacket pocket and sketched hull cross-sections on napkins at lunch. He had never designed a warship in his life. He had never wanted to. But Reed possessed something the entire Royal Navy lacked. He understood industrial reality. He understood that 30 destroyers per year were useless when Britain needed 300 escorts immediately. Betche. The breakthrough came during a sleepless night in early May 1940 as France collapsed and the Wehrmacht raced toward the Channel. Reed pulled out his Southern Pride blueprints and began crossing things out. Remove the whale processing equipment. Remove the catwalks for harpooners. Bolt on a single naval gun. Add depth charge rails. Use the same hull, same engine, same construction techniques his welders already knew by heart. The result on paper was a vessel 205 feet long with a 33-foot beam. Top speed 16 knots. Single 4-inch gun. Crew of 40. It looked nothing like a warship. It looked like exactly what it was: a whaling boat with weapons. But Reed had calculated the cost. £20,000. 1/10 of a destroyer. Construction time 8 months instead of 18. And here was the revolutionary part. Any commercial yard in Britain could build them. Not just the 7 naval shipyards. Hall Russell in Aberdeen, Smith's Dock in Middlesbrough, John Crown and Sons in Sunderland, small fishing boat builders, coastal freighter yards. Dozens of facilities suddenly became potential warship factories. Reed walked into the Admiralty meeting room in May 1940, carrying his blueprints and a quiet, terrifying confidence. He was about to propose something that violated every tradition the Royal Navy had defended since the days of Nelson. The reaction was immediate and predictable. Senior officers looked at the blueprints. They looked at Reed. They looked at each other. Then they began to laugh. Whoa! The proposal was, in their professional opinion, insane, ridiculous, suicidal. Admiral Dudley Pound, First Sea Lord, called the design scarcely fit for purpose. One captain reportedly threw the blueprints across the room and demanded to know which lunatic had let a fishing boat designer waste the Admiralty's time. Their objections were not unreasonable. Reed's ship could only manage 16 knots. A surfaced U-boat could outrun it. The single 4-inch gun was inadequate. The depth charge system involved literally rolling explosives off the back of the ship like beer barrels off a delivery truck. The hull rolled 40 degrees in moderate seas. The accommodations were cramped beyond endurance. There was no proper heating. The ship had no aesthetic appeal whatsoever. Compared to a destroyer, Reed's vessel was a joke. Every traditional metric of naval excellence, the Corvette failed spectacularly. Wow. But Commander George Creasy, director of anti-submarine warfare, was sitting in that meeting, and Creasy was not laughing. Creasy was a man who had been studying actual U-boat engagement data for 2 years. He understood something his colleagues did not. The Royal Navy did not need superior ships. It needed presence. Constant, overwhelming, unavoidable presence. Wolf packs depended on outnumbering escorts. What happened when convoys carried not 2 escorts, but 8, 10, 12? For the price of 1 destroyer, Britain could build 10 of Reed's whaling boats. In the 18 months required to build 3 destroyers, British yards could launch 20 corvettes. The arithmetic was not a question of quality versus quantity. It was a question of survival versus extinction. Creasy made his case directly to Churchill. The First Lord understood instantly. Churchill had been writing memos for months demanding hulls in the water now. Not perfect ships in 2 years, hulls. Now. On July 25, 1940, while the Battle of Britain raged overhead and Spitfires dueled Messerschmitts in the skies above Kent, the Admiralty quietly placed contracts for 58 of Reed's vessels. They needed names. Someone in the procurement office, perhaps as a deliberate insult to the design, suggested naming them after garden flowers. Gladiolus, Bluebell, Campanula, Nasturtium, Heliotrope. The flower-class corvettes had been born. The naval traditionalists were furious. Britain was about to send fishing boats with flower names to fight Hitler's submarine wolves. They did not know that this decision would save thousands of lives. The first test came at Smith's Dock in August 1940. Reed himself supervised the laying of the keel for HMS Gladiolus. The conditions were chaotic. German bombers were attacking British ports almost daily. Materials were rationed. Skilled workers were being conscripted. Reed had to teach merchant ship welders how to install naval fittings using techniques he was inventing as he went. The shipyard workers themselves were skeptical. They had built fishing trawlers for 30 years. Now they were supposedly building warships. Foreman Edward Hartley wrote in his diary that the men called the project Reed's Folly during the first weeks. They expected the ships to break apart in heavy seas or be sunk by the first U-boat that fired at them. But Reed had designed the Corvette to be built fast and built simply. The triple expansion steam engines were essentially scaled-up Victorian railway locomotive mechanisms. Britain manufactured them by the hundreds for tugboats and merchant ships. They were sitting on warehouse shelves. Riveted construction. Commercial-grade steel. Standard merchant ship components. Every choice prioritized one criterion above all others. Speed of construction. By October 1940, just 10 weeks after keel laying, HMS Gladiolus was ready for sea trials. She rolled violently. She pitched heavily. Her single screw propeller pushed her to a maximum of 15.8 knots. The crew quarters were already condemned by Royal Navy medical officers as inadequate before she even left the harbor. But she was a warship, and Britain had built her in less time than it took the Germans to train a U-boat captain. Lieutenant Commander Henry Chesterman took command. His crew of 85 men, mostly volunteers and reservists, with minimal experience, boarded a vessel that had been a blueprint just months earlier. They sailed into the worst weather in living memory. Force 8 gales pounded them within 48 hours of leaving port. The Corvette rolled 42 degrees to port, paused for a heartbeat, then rolled 42 degrees to starboard. 2/3 of the crew vomited continuously for the first 3 days. The remaining third stopped eating. This was the ship that was supposed to save Britain. In November 1940, HMS Gladiolus joined her first convoy escort mission. The merchant captain stared at her in disbelief as she took position. This was their protection. This squat, ugly garden flower named fishing boat. Then on the afternoon of November 16th, the ass-stick operator picked up a contact at 1,500 yards. A U-boat, submerged, approaching the convoy. Chesterman gave the order. Gladiolus turned hard. Her engines screamed. Depth charges rolled off the stern in a diamond pattern. The ocean erupted in massive white explosions. Underwater, the U-boat captain heard the distinctive grinding propellers of a small ship and the unmistakable splash of charges hitting the water. He went deep. He went silent. He fled. The convoy passed through unscathed. The U-boat that had been about to sink 3 merchant ships was hiding at 200 feet, its crew terrified, its attack run destroyed. Gladiolus had not killed a submarine that day. She had done something more important. She had been present. She had forced the Wolf to flee. And while she had pursued that one threat, the convoy had moved 20 miles closer to safety. And across the Atlantic in his headquarters in Lorient, Admiral Karl Dönitz received reports from his U-boat captains throughout late 1940 and early 1941. The reports were strange, confusing. New British escort ships were appearing in the Atlantic. Slow, unfamiliar vessels. The U-boat commanders dismissed them initially. Easy targets, they reported. Should be no threat. Then, U-47, commanded by the most famous submarine ace in the German Navy, Günther Prien, the man who had penetrated Scapa Flow and sunk HMS Royal Oak, encountered HMS Gladiolus southwest of Iceland on the night of March 7, 1941. Prien was hunting convoy OB-293. He had sunk thousands of tons of British shipping. He was Germany's hero, decorated personally by Hitler. Gladiolus detected him on Astic. She closed at her maximum speed of 15 knots. Through heavy seas that should have made depth charging impossible. Chesterman ordered 14 charges in a perfect diamond pattern. U-47's hull collapsed at 180 feet. Günther Prien and his entire crew of 45 men died in the freezing darkness of the North Atlantic. Germany's most celebrated U-boat ace had been killed by a vessel that had been a fishing boat blueprint 12 months earlier. When Dönitz received the news, he refused to believe it. He delayed announcing Prien's death for 10 weeks because he could not accept that one of the German Navy's greatest weapons had been destroyed by what his intelligence reports called a converted whaler. By June 1941, Britain had 89 corvettes operating in the Atlantic. Convoy escort strength had tripled. U-boat attacks were becoming harder to coordinate. The wolf packs that had hunted with impunity throughout 1940 were now finding themselves outnumbered by ships they had dismissed as jokes. But Dönitz was not finished. He was just getting started. The greatest U-boat offensive of the war was still to come. Operation Drumbeat would unleash German submarines against the American coast. New Type 9 long-range U-boats with bigger torpedo loads were entering service. By the autumn of 1942, monthly Allied shipping losses would reach 700,000 tons. Britain would come closer to defeat than at any moment in the entire war. And the men aboard those tiny garden-flower corvettes, freezing seasick, exhausted beyond human endurance, would face the fight of their lives. Could William Reed's ridiculous fishing boats survive what was coming next? Could 85 terrified sailors, crammed into a rolling, pitching, leaking nightmare, actually hold the Atlantic lifeline open against the most concentrated submarine assault in history? In Part 2, we will witness the darkest months of the Battle of the Atlantic. We will follow the corvette crews through the hell of the mid-Atlantic gap, where no aircraft could reach them and no rescue would come. We will see how a converted whaling boat designer's insane idea was about to be tested against everything Hitler's submarine fleet could throw at it. And we will discover the secret weapon that would finally turn cheap British whalers into the most lethal U-boat killers of the entire war. In Part 1, we witness the birth of an impossible idea. A quiet whaling boat designer named William Reed had convinced a desperate British admiralty to build cheap fishing trawlers instead of proper warships. HMS Gladiolus had killed Germany's most famous U-boat ace, Günther Prien. By June 1941, 89 corvettes were prowling the Atlantic. The wolf packs were starting to feel pressure they had never felt before. But convincing a few admirals in London was nothing compared to what came next. Because in October 1941, Admiral Karl Dönitz unleashed something the British Navy had never imagined possible. New Type 9 long-range U-boats, bigger torpedo loads, coordinated attacks involving 15 submarines simultaneously. Monthly shipping losses began climbing again. By February 1942, Britain was losing 700,000 tons per month. The Corvette program was about to face a crisis that would either destroy it forever or transform it into the most lethal anti-submarine force in human history. And this is where everything became much worse. The man standing in William Reed's way wore 4 gold stripes on his sleeve and 72 years of stubborn naval tradition in his bones. Admiral Sir Percy Noble, Commander-in-Chief, Western Approaches. He was not a fool. He was something more dangerous. He was an experienced professional who genuinely believed Reed's corvettes were inadequate murder boxes that were getting British sailors killed. Noble had data. By the autumn of 1941, 47 corvettes were operational in the North Atlantic. 11 had been lost in the previous 6 months. Crew casualties were running at 35% on the worst routes. The ships rolled so violently that ASDIC operators could not maintain proper contact tracking. The depth charge throwers were inadequate. The crews were exhausted, freezing, and undertrained. In November 1941, Noble called Reed and Commander George Creasy to a confrontation at Derby House in Liverpool. The meeting nearly destroyed the corvette program. "Your fishing boats are a disgrace, Mr. Reed." Noble began slapping casualty reports onto the polished mahogany table. 60% of crews report incapacitating seasickness. 3 corvettes have been lost in storms without enemy action. The depth charge attack patterns are amateur hour. I want destroyers, gentlemen. Proper warships. Reed sat silently. He was not a politician. He had no answer for an admiral. "Sir," Creasy interjected carefully, "destroyer production cannot meet operational demand. The mathematics simply—" "Hang the mathematics," Noble exploded. "I have boys drowning in those death traps every week." Again, the threat was implicit. If Noble took his complaints to the War Cabinet, the corvette program could be shut down within weeks. Reed could face dismissal. Creasy could be reassigned to a desk in Scotland. The factories building flowers across Britain would be retooled for something else. Years of work gone. But that night, as Reed walked through the blacked-out Liverpool streets, in despair, an unexpected ally was about to enter his life. His name was Captain Frederick John Walker, Royal Navy, 45 years old, career officer who had been passed over for promotion 3 times because superiors considered him obsessed with anti-submarine warfare to an unhealthy degree. Walker had spent 15 years studying U-boat tactics when no one else cared. He had developed theories about coordinated escort group attacks that the Admiralty had filed away and forgotten. Walker had read every after-action report from every corvette engagement, and Walker had concluded something nobody else had seen. The corvettes were not failing because they were inadequate ships. They were failing because they were being used wrong. Walker requested a meeting with Reed and Creasy. He laid out his theory in 45 minutes. Stop assigning corvettes individually to convoys. Group them. 5 corvettes operating together as a hunting unit. Train them as a team. Develop coordinated attack patterns. Practice until the maneuvers became instinct. The corvettes did not need to be better ships. They needed to fight together. "Give me 5 corvettes for 60 days, Walker said. "Let me prove it." The proposal landed on Admiral Noble's desk in late November 1941. Noble agreed reluctantly. 1 trial. 60 days. If Walker failed, the corvette program would be officially condemned. If he succeeded well, Noble did not expect him to succeed. The day of the test arrived on January 14, 1942. Walker had assembled what he called the 36th Escort Group. HMS Stork as his flagship, a sloop plus the corvettes, HMS Deptford, HMS Penstemen, HMS Convolvulus, HMS Gardenia, and HMS Vetch. 5 Flower-class corvettes, 248 days of intensive training. The crews had practiced coordinated depth charge patterns until they could execute them in their sleep. Walker had developed a tactic he called the creeping attack. While one corvette held ASDIC contact, another would slip silently into position and drop charges from an unexpected angle. The convoy was HG-76. 32 merchant ships departing Gibraltar for Liverpool. The intelligence was grim. German signals indicated 9 U-boats were waiting along the route. Walker would face them with 5 corvettes and his sloop. 5 against 9. Admiral Noble himself had requested observation reports. If the convoy lost more than 4 ships, the corvette program was finished. The first contact came on December 17, 1941, 3 weeks before the official trial actually concluded its parameters, but Walker was already proving his theories at sea. U-131 was detected on the surface at dawn. Walker did something that broke every rule in the British Naval Handbook. He ordered 3 corvettes to break formation and hunt the U-boat. Pensteeman turned hard to starboard. Convolvulus accelerated to 15 knots. Stork closed from astern. The U-boat captain Arend Baumann had never seen escorts behave this way before. They were supposed to stay with the convoy. They were supposed to drop a few depth charges and return to formation. These corvettes were chasing him. Coordinated, methodical, relentless. Baumann dove to 160 feet. Walker's corvettes triangulated his position using overlapping as-dick sweeps. Pensteeman dropped a pattern of 10 charges. Then Convolvulus dropped 6 more from a different angle. Then Stork came in low and slow, executing Walker's creeping attack. U-131 was destroyed at 13:04 hours. 47 German submariners died. But Walker was not done. 3 days later, U-434 was caught by the same coordinated attack. Then, U-574 on the morning of December 19th. Walker's escort group rammed the U-boat after depth charges forced it to surface. HMS Stork was damaged in the collision, but continued fighting. By December 22nd, Walker's group had destroyed 5 U-boats from the Wolfpack hunting HG-76. They had lost 2 merchant ships and the destroyer HMS Stanley. The exchange rate was historic. In every previous convoy battle, the British had lost between 5 and 20 ships per U-boat killed. Walker had reversed the equation completely. Admiral Noble received the after-action reports on December 27, 1941. He read them 3 times. Then he called Walker to Derby House. "Captain Walker," Noble said, his voice unusually quiet. "I owe you and Mr. Reed an apology. Your corvettes have just achieved the most decisive convoy victory of this war." Shit. The numbers were undeniable. Before Walker's coordinated tactics, corvettes had killed U-boats at a rate of approximately 1 submarine per 19 ships lost. After Walker's training program spread across the fleet, the ratio inverted. By mid-1942, escort groups using corvettes were killing 1 U-boat for every 3 ships lost. By 1943, the ratio reached 1 U-boat per ship lost. Then better, much better. But success in one trial was one thing. Convincing the entire Royal Navy was another battle entirely. The Admiralty issued the order in February 1942. All convoy escorts would adopt Walker's coordinated group tactics. The corvette fleet, now numbering 143 operational vessels, would be reorganized into permanent escort groups. Each group would train together, live together, fight together as a single tactical unit. The resistance was immediate. Destroyer captains refused to be grouped with corvettes they considered beneath them. Senior officers complained that group training violated traditional naval doctrine. Old anti-submarine schools resisted teaching the new tactics. Walker himself was sent on a tour of escort bases to personally demonstrate the techniques. He spent 43 consecutive days at sea conducting training exercises in conditions that would have killed lesser men. Production crisis followed. Britain needed 200 more corvettes immediately. The shipyards were already working at maximum capacity. Reed personally traveled to Canadian shipyards in Quebec and Vancouver to teach foremen how to build Flower-class hulls. Canadian production exploded. Within 9 months, Canadian yards were launching corvettes faster than British facilities. By late 1942, 123 Canadian-built corvettes were operating in the Atlantic. The German reaction was confusion bordering on panic. Dönitz received reports throughout the spring of 1942 that something fundamental had changed. U-boat captains who had operated with impunity in 1941 were now being killed at unprecedented rates. U-252 lost in April, U-94 in August, U-379 in August, U-660 in November. Each loss represented an irreplaceable trained crew. Donitz studied the after-action reports obsessively. He could not understand why his tactics were suddenly failing. The wolf packs still found convoys, the torpedoes still functioned, but the British escorts were no longer scattered, panicked individuals. They were coordinated hunting groups that pursued U-boats with terrifying patience. In June 1942, Donitz wrote in his war diary that the British escort tactics had achieved a level of sophistication that German naval intelligence had not predicted. He demanded countermeasures, new torpedoes, new tactics, new U-boat designs. The Battle of the Atlantic had transformed. The Garden Flowers were no longer joke ships. They were systematic killers operating in coordinated packs. But Donitz was not finished. The German submarine commander was about to deploy something that would change everything once again. The acoustic homing torpedo. The snorkel breathing tube that would let U-boats stay submerged indefinitely. New Type 21 electro-boot submarines that could outrun any corvette underwater. And in the spring of 1943, Donitz would launch his largest offensive of the war. 130 U-boats, coordinated attacks on every Atlantic convoy route simultaneously, the decisive battle of the entire campaign. In Part 3, we will witness the climactic confrontation. We will follow the corvette crews into the bloodiest months of the Atlantic War, when convoy ONS-5 became the most ferocious naval engagement of World War II. We will see how William Reed's whaling boats, now numbering over 300 operational vessels, faced their ultimate test against the largest concentrated submarine force ever assembled. We will discover the secret weapons, both German and British, that would decide the fate of the entire war. And we will meet the U-boat captains who realized in the final terrified weeks of 1943 that they were no longer the hunters. They had become the prey. The real war was just beginning. In Part 1, William Reed convinced a desperate British admiralty to build cheap whaling boats instead of destroyers. In Part 2, Captain Frederick Walker proved that coordinated corvette groups could devastate U-boat wolf packs. By February 1942, Britain had transformed her escort fleet. The Flowers were no longer joke ships. They were systematic killers. But Admiral Karl Donitz was not finished. As 1942 ended, German intelligence had finally decoded what was happening. Donitz responded with the largest submarine offensive in human history. 130 operational U-boats, new acoustic homing torpedoes, new snorkel breathing tubes. By March 1943, Allied shipping losses spiked to 627,000 tons in a single month. The Atlantic was bleeding again. Hitler personally ordered Donitz to break Britain by summer. And now this was no longer a test. This was the decisive battle of the entire war. The German response in early 1943 was methodical and terrifying. Donitz pulled together every submarine in the Kriegsmarine for what he called the decisive battle. By April 1943, he had concentrated 40 U-boats in the North Atlantic alone, all hunting in massive coordinated wolf packs. The new weapons were nightmarish. The G7E/T5 Zaunkönig acoustic torpedo would home in on the propeller noise of British escorts. The snorkel device allowed U-boats to remain submerged for weeks while running diesel engines. New radar detectors warned U-boat captains the moment British aircraft began searching for them. Donitz had studied every corvette tactic and engineered countermeasures for each one. In Berlin, Admiral Erich Raeder presented Hitler with projections in February 1943. If U-boat sinkings could be increased to 800,000 tons monthly for 6 months, Britain would collapse. Hitler personally signed the order authorizing maximum submarine production. 60 new U-boats per month. The German submarine fleet would grow to 400 operational vessels by mid-1944. The casualty figures from March 1943 were catastrophic. Convoy SC-121 lost 13 ships in 3 nights. Convoy HX-228 lost 4 ships and the destroyer HMS Harvester. Convoy SC-122 and HX-229 were attacked simultaneously by 43 U-boats. 22 merchant ships destroyed. 146,000 tons gone. The British Admiralty privately concluded that the convoy system might collapse entirely within 90 days. Dönitz was winning. The Corvette program was being overwhelmed by sheer German submarine numbers and superior new technology. In Liverpool, Captain Walker received reports that some of his most experienced Corvette captains were being killed at unprecedented rates. The acoustic torpedoes were specifically designed to destroy escorts. The hunters were becoming hunted. But this was not the only crisis striking the Corvette fleet. Inside the Admiralty, a vicious internal conflict erupted in early 1943. The Corvette program had grown too fast. Quality control was failing. 3 Flower-class vessels had broken up in heavy storms during February alone. HMS Heliotrope developed catastrophic hull cracks. Crew complaints about inadequate equipment reached crisis levels. The newer Castle-class corvettes were arriving with defective ASTIC sets that failed in cold water. William Reed himself faced accusations from senior naval architects who claimed his designs were fundamentally flawed. A formal inquiry was launched in March 1943. Reed was summoned to defend his work before a panel of 7 admirals. The hearings were brutal. Casualty statistics were read aloud. Photographs of split hulls were displayed. One admiral demanded Reed be removed from the program entirely. The political pressure intensified. Members of Parliament questioned the Corvette program in closed sessions. Newspaper editors received briefings suggesting the cheap whaler concept had been a strategic blunder. Reed slept barely 4 hours per night. His health collapsed. By April 1943, he was hospitalized briefly with exhaustion and stress-induced illness. Captain Walker was simultaneously fighting his own crisis. 2 of his escort group corvettes had been destroyed by the new acoustic torpedoes within a single week. HMS Polyanthus and HMS Itchen went down with massive loss of life. Walker was forced to develop emergency countermeasures while continuing operations. He created the Foxer device, a noise-making decoy towed behind escorts to confuse acoustic torpedoes. The doubt was suffocating. Was the Corvette concept obsolete? Had Reed's whaling boats simply become death traps in an age of advanced German weapons? Even Walker himself privately questioned whether the program could survive. But then, on the night of April 28, 1943, an event began that would change everything. The convoy was ONS-5, 43 merchant ships sailing from Liverpool to Halifax. The escort group commander was Lieutenant Commander Peter Gretton, a Walker-trained officer commanding the B-7 group. 7 vessels, the destroyer HMS Duncan as flagship, the frigate HMS Tay, and 5 Flower-class corvettes, HMS Sunflower, HMS Snowflake, HMS Pink, HMS Loosestrife, HMS Vedette. 40 U-boats were waiting along their route. Dönitz had personally selected this convoy for destruction. He committed 3 separate wolf packs: Group Star, Group Spect, Group Fink, the largest concentration of submarines ever deployed against a single convoy in the entire war. The first attack came on the night of April 29th. Visibility 0. Force 8 gales. Snow squalls. The sea conditions were the worst possible for ASTIC operation. U-258 fired 4 torpedoes. The merchant ship McKeesport exploded. Gretton ordered immediate counterattack. HMS Sunflower turned hard to port. HMS Tay raced toward the periscope sighting. Depth charges thundered into black water. U-258 dove deep and escaped. But this was only the beginning. Bashed for the next 4 nights, ONS-5 became the most ferocious naval engagement of World War II. The Germans pressed 41 separate attack runs against the convoy. The British corvette crews fought without sleep, without food, without relief. Gretton was forced to detach HMS Duncan after the destroyer ran low on fuel. Command passed to Lieutenant Commander Robert Sherwood aboard HMS Tay. Sherwood now commanded 6 small ships against 40 submarines. The night of May 4th was the climax. Visibility had dropped to 50 yards. 24 U-boats attacked simultaneously. Wave after wave. The convoy was being slaughtered. 12 merchant ships had already been sunk. Sherwood made a desperate decision. Instead of staying defensive, he ordered every corvette to attack aggressively. HMS Sunflower detected U-638 on Aztec. Pattern of 14 depth charges. The U-boat imploded at 200 feet. 44 Germans dead. HMS Pink charged into a subpack of 3 U-boats. Hedgehog projectiles forward. Depth charges astern. U-192 hit at 140 feet. Sank with all hands. 55 Germans dead. HMS Loosestrife caught U-125 surfaced in fog. Rammed her. Cut her in half. 23 Germans died. HMS Snowflake forced U-531 to the surface with prolonged depth charge attacks. The corvette opened fire with her single 4-inch gun at point-blank range. The U-boat broke apart. 40 Germans dead. HMS Vedette destroyed U-630 with a perfect hedgehog attack. All 47 crew lost. The killing continued throughout the night. By dawn on May 5th, the British escort group had destroyed 7 U-boats. 4 more were so heavily damaged they limped back to France and never returned to combat. The convoy had lost 12 merchant ships, but Donitz had lost an entire wolf pack. When the casualty reports reached Lorient on the morning of May 6th, Admiral Donitz was speechless. His son Peter had been serving aboard U-954, one of the U-boats lost during ONS-5. Donitz received personal confirmation of his son's death along with the operational disaster. 350 German submariners killed in 72 hours. Throughout May 1943, the slaughter of U-boats continued at unprecedented rates. 41 German submarines were destroyed in that single month. April losses had been 15. The kill rate had nearly tripled. Donitz received reports that experienced U-boat commanders were refusing to sail. Crew morale was collapsing. On May 24, 1943, Admiral Karl Donitz signed the order that admitted defeat. He withdrew all U-boats from the North Atlantic convoy routes. The Battle of the Atlantic, the campaign that Churchill had called the only one that genuinely terrified him, was effectively over. Donitz wrote in his war diary that the Allies had achieved tactical superiority that German technology could not overcome. He never explained the secret. The secret was hundreds of cheap whaling boats, fighting in coordinated groups manned by exhausted volunteers who refused to break. News of the victory spread through Allied command structures within hours. The strategic impact was immediate and overwhelming. Convoy losses dropped from 627,000 tons in March 1943 to 65,000 tons by July 1943. A reduction of nearly 90% in 4 months. American Liberty ship production now exceeded U-boat sinkings by a factor of 6 to 1. The Atlantic lifeline was secure. The build-up for D-Day became possible only because of this victory. 150,000 American troops crossed the Atlantic in May 1943, alone, without losing a single soldier to U-boat attack. By June 1944, Operation Overlord required the safe passage of 2 million men, 500,000 vehicles, and 4 million tons of supplies. None of it would have been possible if the corvettes had failed. The Royal Navy publicly recognized Captain Walker with the Distinguished Service Order, his 4th such honor. Walker would die of overwork in July 1944, having commanded escort groups that destroyed 24 U-boats. William Reed received recognition more quietly, awarded the commander of the Order of the British Empire. The London Times finally acknowledged in a 1944 editorial that the despised whaling boats had achieved what proper warships could never have managed. Final battle of the Atlantic statistics confirmed the magnitude. Flower-class corvettes had participated in actions destroying 294 U-boats, 47 solo kills, 247 shared, 15,000 German submariners killed. The single most decisive weapon system of the entire campaign had cost £10 million total. But the story was not finished. Because what happened to William Reed after the war ended? What happened to the men who had served aboard the corvettes? What happened to the ships themselves? And what lessons did this entire saga teach about how nations should fight wars? The answers contain shocking surprises. Reed's name would be largely forgotten by history. The corvettes would be scrapped or sold to obscure navies. The crews would receive no special recognition. And yet the philosophical revolution that William Reed sparked would influence military doctrine for the next 80 years, all the way to the present day. In Part 4, we will discover the final chapter that almost no one knows. The story has one final twist that changes everything. In Part 1, William Reed proposed building cheap whaling boats instead of destroyers. In Part 2, Captain Walker proved coordinated corvette groups could destroy U-boat wolf packs. In Part 3, the Battle of ONS-5 forced Admiral Dönitz to withdraw his submarine fleet from the North Atlantic, ending the campaign that had nearly starved Britain into surrender. 294 U-boats destroyed, 15,000 German submariners killed, the Atlantic lifeline saved. But what happened to William Reed? What happened to the men who served aboard the corvettes? What happened to the ships themselves? This story has a final twist that almost no one knows. Recently declassified documents reveal information that changes how we understand the entire corvette program. The whaling boat designer who saved Britain would die in obscurity. The ships that won the Atlantic would be scrapped or sold for pennies. And yet, the philosophical revolution Reed sparked would shape military doctrine for the next 80 years, all the way to the present day. Because success sometimes comes with a price the world refuses to pay. When the war ended in May 1945, William Reed was 63 years old and exhausted beyond recovery. He returned to Smith's Dock Company in Middlesbrough, where he had spent his entire career. There were no parades for him, no knighthood, no biographical books written about his contribution. The British government awarded him the Commander of the Order of the British Empire in 1944, a respectable but modest honor for a man whose designs had helped save the nation. Reed quietly resumed designing whaling vessels, the same Antarctic factory ships he had created before the war. He retired in 1949 and lived in a small house outside Middlesbrough with his wife Mabel. Local newspapers occasionally mentioned him. National media never did. He died on December 20, 1953, at the age of 71. His obituary in the Times was 3 paragraphs long. The phrase "flower-class corvette" did not appear in it. Captain Frederick Walker had already paid the ultimate price. The man whose tactics had transformed the corvette into a U-boat killer collapsed from cerebral thrombosis on July 9, 1944. He had commanded escort groups that destroyed 24 U-boats. He had spent 472 days at sea between January 1942 and his death. The Admiralty buried him at sea with full military honors aboard HMS Hesperus. He was 48 years old. Walker died believing the corvette program had been the most important contribution of his life. The corvette crews scattered into civilian life. Lieutenant Commander Robert Sherwood, who had commanded the desperate defense of ONS-5, returned to insurance work in Birmingham. He never spoke publicly about the battle that had saved the convoy system. Lieutenant Commander Peter Gretton became a respected historian and admiral. He wrote one book about the Atlantic War that received modest attention. The 85,000 men who had served aboard British corvettes received no special veterans organization, no commemorative medal beyond standard service awards. Admiral Sir Percy Noble, who had nearly canceled the corvette program in November 1941, was eventually transferred to Washington. He wrote in his private memoirs that he had been wrong about William Reed and the Flower class. The memoirs were never published. The ships themselves suffered the cruelest fate. Of the 418 Flower-class corvettes built during the war, 271 were sold for scrap between 1946 and 1949. Buyers paid £1,000 per vessel. The same ships that had cost £20,000 to build that had killed Gunther Prien and saved entire convoys were broken apart for steel and sold by the ton. But Reed's true legacy was never about medals. The Corvette concept did not disappear when the Flowers were scrapped. It evolved. The British River-class frigate, the larger Castle-class corvette, and the post-war Loch-class were all direct descendants of Reed's design philosophy. The principle was identical. Build adequate ships in overwhelming numbers. Use existing commercial shipbuilding capacity. Prioritize quantity and rapid construction over individual ship performance. By 1955, navies around the world had adopted variations of the Corvette concept. Canada built 34 wartime corvettes and continued operating them well into the 1950s. Australia built 60 corvettes during the war and used the same design philosophy for post-war destroyer escorts. The United States Navy, despite its preference for larger warships, adopted Corvette principles when it built 300 destroyer escorts during 1943 and 1944. The Korean War brought Corvette descendants back into combat. United Nations forces used surplus Flower-class corvettes for coastal patrol work along the Korean Peninsula. Royal Canadian Navy corvettes participated in the Incheon landings. The same vessels that had hunted U-boats now provided naval gunfire support for ground troops. During the Cold War, the Soviet Navy developed an entire ship category called the Malý protivolodotchný korabil, the small anti-submarine ship. The design philosophy mirrored Reed's exactly. Build small, cheap, mass-producible vessels capable of overwhelming submarine threats through numerical superiority. The Soviets built over 200 such vessels throughout the 1960s and 1970s. The Falklands War in 1982 demonstrated Corvette principles still worked. The Royal Navy used Type 21 frigates, direct descendants of Corvette philosophy, to escort the British task force. Modern littoral combat ships used by navies today. The American Independence class, the Chinese. Type 0, 5-6, the Israeli Sa'ar class, all trace their conceptual ancestry directly to William Reed's whaling boat blueprint of 1940. The total impact across 8 decades is staggering. By conservative estimates, vessels designed using Corvette principles have served in the navies of 47 nations. They have participated in every major naval conflict since 1945. They have rescued tens of thousands of merchant sailors during peacetime emergencies. The civilian shipping industry adopted similar mass production techniques for tankers and bulk carriers, vastly increasing global trade capacity. But the deepest lesson was never about ships. The Corvette story teaches uncomfortable truths about how institutions resist innovation. The Royal Navy of 1940 was not stupid. It was experienced. Senior officers had spent careers studying naval warfare. Their objections to Reed's design were professionally reasonable, yet they were wrong because they could not separate quality from utility. They could not accept that adequate weapons available immediately defeat perfect weapons available too late. This pattern repeats throughout military history. The German military rejected radar for years because traditional optics were considered sufficient. The American military rejected guided missiles in favor of conventional artillery. The Soviet military rejected personal computers as bourgeois decadence. In each case, institutional pride prevented adoption of obviously superior solutions until enemies forced change through battlefield results. Reed himself embodied a different lesson. He was not a military genius. He was not even a naval architect by primary specialization. He was a quiet civilian engineer who looked at a problem and proposed a practical solution. He had no political connections. He commanded no troops. He had no platform for self-promotion. He simply did the work and trusted that competent observers would recognize value. History contains many similar stories. Hedy Lamarr, the Hollywood actress who patented frequency-hopping radio technology that became the foundation of modern wireless communication. Nikola Tesla, whose alternating current electrical system was rejected by the establishment until reality forced acceptance. Tommy Flowers, the British telephone engineer who built Colossus, the first electronic computer to break German codes. None of these innovators received appropriate recognition during their lifetimes. The pattern matters because it continues today. In every modern conflict, in every contemporary industry, innovative ideas face institutional resistance. The Corvette story reminds us that breakthrough solutions often come from unexpected sources, from people without credentials, from concepts that experts dismiss as crazy or simplistic. But there is one final detail almost no one knows. As in 2018, the British National Archives declassified a series of internal Admiralty documents from 1943. Among them was a personal memorandum written by Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, 1st Sea Lord, dated August 14, 1943. Cunningham had requested an analysis of which technological decision had most contributed to victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. Naval intelligence experts compiled a comprehensive report examining radar improvements, sonar advances, code-breaking achievements, aircraft developments, and weapons innovations. The report concluded that no single technology had been decisive. The Corvette program had been the determining factor. Specifically, the analysts identified William Reed's original 1940 decision to use commercial shipbuilding standards as the most important strategic choice of the entire campaign. Without it, Britain would have lacked the industrial capacity to produce sufficient escorts. The convoy system would have collapsed by mid-1942. Cunningham wrote a personal note on the report's cover page. The note read simply that the British Empire owed its survival to a man whose name most senior officers could not remember. The document was sealed for 75 years. When researchers finally accessed the report in 2018, they discovered something remarkable. Cunningham had attempted to nominate Reed for elevation to the peerage in 1944. The recommendation was rejected by the Honors Committee on grounds that civilian engineers from commercial shipbuilding backgrounds did not meet appropriate criteria. The rejection letter survives in the archives. Reed never knew he had been considered. He died believing his contribution had been forgotten. But Cunningham had been right. The British Empire had survived because of a quiet man from Middlesbrough. The story comes full circle. From a sleepless night in May 1940, when an anonymous whaling boat designer unrolled blueprints that the Royal Navy called insane, to the salvation of an empire and the protection of 2 million Allied lives across the Atlantic. William Reed proved that the most powerful weapon is not the most expensive one. It is the one that arrives in time. 294 U-boats destroyed, 15,000 enemy submariners killed, 300 convoys protected, 2 million Allied troops transported safely across the Atlantic. The D-Day invasion made possible. The European war shortened by an estimated 2 years. Hundreds of thousands of lives saved through the prevention of starvation in Britain. All accomplished by ships that cost 10% of a destroyer and were built by workers who had previously constructed fishing trawlers. From a quiet civilian engineer with an idea that everyone called ridiculous to the deciding factor in the most strategically important campaign of World War II. William Reed proved that adequate solutions delivered immediately defeat perfect solutions delivered too late. And because of his persistence, more than 2 million Allied servicemen crossed the Atlantic safely to fight the war that liberated Europe. That is the power of practical innovation, the power of one quiet man refusing to accept that good enough was not good enough. If you know similar stories of forgotten innovators who changed history, share them in the comments below. This is just one of hundreds of impossible ideas that won World War II. Subscribe to discover more historical stories that almost no one remembers. The greatest weapons are not always the most powerful ones. Sometimes they are simply the ones that show up.